Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Did you know that simply understanding your energy use can drive real savings? What if you could compare your building's usage to others in your community? Find out on today's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Hi, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Cook, VP of Technical Strategy at AEIC and host of the Grid Mod Pod. Today I'll be talking with Phil Madnick. He's the section manager at Orange Rockland Utilities, and it's all about ONR's Building Energy Usage Portal. And this matters because data, which we all know we love data, only helps when people can actually see it, trust it, and use it. So this is a great use case example. So you'll learn what the portal does and how it supports efficiency, why easy access to customer energy data changes engagement across all silos, and really how AMI and customer segmentation helps utility continue to serve safe, reliable, and affordable power. So thank you, Phil, for joining us today. So why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself, and then we'll hop into talking about the project.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for having me on the podcast today. My name is Phil Madnick. I've been in the energy industry for about 18 years. I started back, before I came to the utility world. I started in construction doing weatherization work, and I eventually came to actually working at Con Edison in 2010. And since then, I have had my career at Con Ed, and I came actually over to Con Edison's sub-company, Orange and Rockland Utilities, back in 2022. Yes, on this topic of BUP or building an usage portal, I think the best place to start is with the topic of benchmarking. Benchmarking may have been something that folks may have heard about. It's the concept of comparing yourself to something else. And in the energy world, we compare our energy usage to the energy usage of our neighbors. So this kind of concept actually became a local law in New York City back in the mid-2010s. If you remember, there was Department of Energy. The Obama administration had something called the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And that was something a lot of cities throughout the country started getting involved in and making large commercial buildings start to benchmark their properties using the DOE, Department of Energy, Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool. And from there, it became more and more popular until it eventually became a local law in New York City. I was at Con Ed at the time, and I recall, once again, it was a big project for us to make sure we facilitate customers so they could get their energy usage, right? The biggest challenge in large buildings is it's not just one individual. This is not a homeowner living in one place and they have 1 meter and they submit that data and they compare it against their neighbor who has 1 meter. No, in a building, typically you have multiple tenants, sometimes residential tenants, sometimes commercial tenants. Each one has access to their own meter, and we have to consolidate all that data together into one aggregated usage database. And then from there, we could start to make comparisons, such as energy use intensity and whatnot. So that's how the story began.
So more or less, the story so the pain point really wasn't a pain point. It was just an acknowledgement that there was an initiative or some type of external factor saying, this is what we want to do, this is where we want to go. So you all had to kind of think through, okay, how are we going to make this happen?
Yeah, and sometimes in our world, we use the word compliance. Utilities are there, we provide transmission and distribution service, electric and gas, and we're also here to comply with regulatory requirements in the energy industry that, customers have to abide by these requirements, and we're your energy services provider. We're here to help you as a customer comply with those things. That's our job as well.
So thinking I guess timeline wise, I think you mentioned when it started, but was there an active moment where you were doing what you needed to do to effectively meet, a certain standard, and then maybe with, the realization of how to do it and what processes or maybe data sets or availability of data, accessibility to data, the accuracy of the data, was there a journey in really methodically thinking through the various stakeholders at your organization?
Yeah, I would say exactly. So once again, I wasn't so involved in the project to create a benchmarking portal tool during my time at Con Ed. But when I came over to ONR, Orange Rockland Utilities back in 2022, one of the first things I observed is that we actually did not have a web-based automated tool. It was very much a paperwork process to facilitate that. And that was somewhat of a compliance issue. We had to quickly scale up. The requirement was, I think it was web services is the term that it used. The regulator, that's both in New York and New Jersey, where we provide service, they both wanted a online-based system for customers to easily be able to enter, not for customers to have to mail in a paper application and wait for paperwork to get signed, physically speaking. So that was somewhat of a catch-up, that we figured out was a gap in our technological capability. So the first step we did when we realized we had that gap, or at least I realized we had that gap, was I had to ask for a budget and time. Right. So this was about, I would say, mid 2023. That's just about the time when New Jersey adopted its own regulatory requirement. New York has had, specifically New York City, has had regulatory requirements, once again, going back a decade. New Jersey only adopted the requirement in 2023. So that's when we immediately had to hurry up. So I submitted that waiver request to get ourselves a little bit more time and to get ourselves a capital budget. So that was the first step I had to accomplish in 2023. And from there, we hit the ground running. We got a vendor on board, consultant that could help us build out this technological or automated web services platform. That was the task. It took us about, starting in that fall of 2023, it took us about 7 to 8 months. My goal was to have a live system in time for the second reporting year. Right, the first reporting year, BPU required it 2023. Summer of 2023. My goal was to have something live and ready for customers by summer of 2024. And that's where we ran to get to that finish line.
And you might have said it, but just to kind of put a stake in the ground. So so this was a portal, a tool that was accessible by the customers, which, I guess, what is the number of customers that your organization serves for our listeners?
Oh, just so to be clear, Orange Rockland serves over 300,000 customers.
Okay. So you more or less had to have a
Customers.
portal that was accessible to 300 and so many customers. They have to know about it.
Yep.
Then they have to, easily be able to submit or
Yes.
extract.
Yeah, submit the data, interconnect. Yeah, let's go through that whole journey that has to happen.
Yes.
Yeah. So so let me mitigate a little bit, because although, yes, we do have over 300,000 electric customers and we have gas customers as well. Many of those are gas customers as well. The requirement was actually only for large commercial buildings, 20,000 square foot above. One of the internal requirements I set for myself, since we were going to be spending this kind of money, is that any customer could access this portal. That was my goal. And actually today, the portal is open to any customer. It's not limited just to the top tier commercial customers. But once again, yeah, the goal is for a customer to be able to go online into this portal, submit their information, basically say, this is who I am, here's my premise address, here are the meters at my building, interconnect that building that they just created in our portal. We're going to interconnect that with that Department of Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool. So the data will flow to there.
So some integration.
Yeah, integration.
It's not always simple.
And we're going to go ahead once again and collect all that aggregated data for them for historical purposes and set up an automated recurring feed. So that data, they never have to touch that data, that setup again. Every year, their premise will update with their aggregated data. For automated reporting, they could do it for benchmarking if they want. If they want to do it through the Department of Energy, if they want to do it for a state ordinance, as we have in New Jersey, they want to do it maybe for municipal. Like in New York, there are some municipal ordinances that are starting to roll out. So that was the idea. No more manual paperwork. Set up this automated web services tool. Yeah.
And so thinking of, like you mentioned before, is, the energy provider that serves the 24/7, 365 highly reliable electrical power service is a service to the community that, is regulated and required to serve all. There is this, undercurrent of the need to drive and utilize energy efficiency tools, appliances, ways to do things to just, reduce the overall usage of the actual customer. And so what this tool has done was to provide another service to streamline the accessibility of historical data and usage of said commodity, electrical power, and connect it with another large amount of information data set that can really drive the end user, aka your customer, to understand which levers and or services and or devices would provide an impact to their overall energy usage, right? So you're kind of being a
Exactly.
partner in this transformational time of energy efficiency.
Yeah, and we always say that that is the first step. You can't address, if you come from this from a climate or environmental approach, you have to address things in terms of what gets you through the door, and that's information, right? So you have to have that information to know how your building is using energy. Energy use intensity is one metric, and benchmarking against others is how you exercise that metric. So that was the goal. Let's give the customers this information, and from there, we could start to, flag things such as, hey, you may be a great candidate to participate in our commercial direct install program that services customers with new HVAC, high efficiency HVAC equipment. Maybe you're a potential candidate for building decarbonization based on how well you're performing. Or maybe you still have to do that weatherization, like insulate your envelope to get there, right? You want to make sure you do things in an orderly fashion. So it all starts once again with information. Where do you compare? How does your energy use compare? Benchmark from an energy usage intensity perspective, and then make that decision. What is my step to how to engage in energy efficiency and building decarbonization?
Right. And I just, just as my personal, I mean, I'm geeking out here, which, I haven't showed my excitement yet. But like, if you think about, every utility is up against this question of how do we, one, continue to serve a safe, reliable, affordable power grid while also knowing there's this strong awareness that individual customers and users of the grid are looking for a more understanding of like what it actually is to serve. Now, I guess they could do a whole customer segmentation. You got a part that actually doesn't and will never ask. You have another portion of customer that like they only actually lean in when the bill seems a little bit higher than they expected. And then you have some of those savvier customers that like know how to get the information, know what the information says, and then drive them to actually make decisions to do said work. And so I think it's just really important to share some of these really, seems simple and obvious work streams. And, there's an expectation to maybe like share the varying perspectives of, it can't just be done overnight. Take a massive amount of data from the edge of the grid, bring it back and have it retrievable in a very accessible way. I mean, there's software, there's integration, there's implementation, but I think the crux of it is communicating it effectively so your end users know that this service was even set up and provided. Take away the fact that it was a compliance or a mandate, right? Or that you're required to do by a certain date. Most individuals don't understand a lot of that happening. They just see the end product. So I think it's really
Absolutely.
important to really validate that like these requests have a ripple effect across an organization that has based their way of doing things for decades, suddenly being disrupted to ask to do a certain way differently. Not that it's wrong, right? It's just that, oh, okay, give us a moment. We need to do this whole type of a process understanding so that we can then create said tool. So I guess that was a long-winded way to get to my next question. When you became involved, like what were the number of stakeholders that you really had to engage to really bring this awareness to the front, to gain access to the time and resources to do so, as well as create the partnerships with your vendors and then actually execute the work? Because we do a lot of talking, but like then putting, boots to the ground, executing, like what were the extent of those stakeholders that you had to engage with?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And actually, as I start responding, talking about stakeholders, there was a major transition happening in 2023 that I failed to mention actually when we first started talking. So Con Edison and Orange and Rockland did something we call the customer care and billing system upgrade. That was a multi-year project that completed in the fall of 2023. That was a massive undertaking. I think hundreds of millions of dollars were spent, and that was a big interruption to how we consolidate billing and energy use data. This came right on the heels of when we finished full AMI meter deployment. right? We started deploying that to our service territory back in 2019. That wrapped up mostly across both our companies, probably around 2021. And then right after that, we get engaged in this, what we call, once again, customer care and billing, or CC&B billing upgrade system. So you're talking about upgrading meters and a billing system that hadn't been touched in decades, probably going back to the 1970s. So that was a massive undertaking to modernize those massive infrastructure tools.
And
And then, yeah,
all that to caveat before you don't lose
yeah,
sight of what you're saying. But to even be able to create this portal that has access to all this historical data archives, you have to have the advanced meter infrastructure that you
those
just spoke.
infrastructure pieces. Yeah. So it was kind of perfect timing, but then
Right.
again, it could, once again, we did have to ask for a little bit extra time. I keep saying we had to ask for a waiver because everything was landing at the same time. And we had to tell, once again, the BPU in New Jersey, say, hey, listen, we got a lot going on right now. Two massive infrastructure upgrades are landing in front of customers. We want to make sure those systems are perfect before we build this portal. I need 6 more months. That was basically the statement there. And they were happy to give it to us. And once again, we like to publicize. We put out a lot of statements saying that the CCNB project was pretty much flawless when it landed. I mean, perfect, almost perfect billing. You're not having issues where customers saying, I'm getting bills from the company all of a sudden and it doesn't
Right.
match my usage. This is wrong. No, we have near perfect billing going on. And now, once again, less than a year later, you have a portal that's near perfect in terms of giving you that aggregated data. So yeah, so those are the blocks, and now we can get into the stakeholders of how that we made that happen. So absolutely, IT integration from our company, and I had a lot of help there. So I gotta think that there's a team in two teams in IT. We call it business software development. We have a section there that specializes in concierge launching products, digital products. I got to thank my colleague Jennifer Moy there. And I have another colleague in the enterprise data and analytics team, a guy named Andrew Wong. They're highly experienced professional people that were able to leverage the specifications for the building an user portal product. They had already done that for Con Ed, so they're really just leveraging a lot of the experience they had just completed for Con Edison to leverage it to support Orange and Rockland. So those were my primary stakeholders from a technological perspective to get this done.
And I think there's like a common theme, and really one of the reasons why I love to show up on this podcast and giving the voices to those that are executing and doing. Because, when we think about like where we've been, where we are, where we're headed, where we ought to go, that's like a conversation that a lot of strategists sit in a room and discuss. But like the practicality or the understanding of the enormous amount of labor of love that must exist to kind of create the foundations to then expedite these large strategic visions, I think is like a lost story, right? And so, I wanted to kind of bring it to full, like, why access to energy usage matters. At the core, it's about visibility, right? And visibility is the prerequisite for efficiency. So if we think about like what we've done with this, like, industry as a historical, right? Overarching load growth for 80 years. Then it was like, hey, wait a second, as a unified civilization, we need to kind of create energy efficiency so we're not continuously overutilizing this power grid that we built over the last 80 years. So let's start running these mechanics. But at the time, we didn't have the technology or the need, truthfully, to have the granular insight that your portal is now giving access to, as well as what AMI does. So like for decades, the grid was designed and around this aggregate demand, not granular. So utilities, so I'm not just speaking on behalf of Con Ed, but like every utility plans for peaks and averages for really the first century of how this grid has been built out. So customers, individuals that just use our power as we want it, has very little understanding of how, when, or why they are using energy and what massive amount of infrastructure is required. So I guess I'm highlighting the fact that like your work, even though like once you get in it, you got your parties aligned and you execute, the end goal is an incredible, valuable entrance to enabling, really the end user to become owners of how they use energy, right? So if you think about that linkage, so now they can be like, okay, now I understand my energy usage at a more granular level. thank you, utility, for providing me that. And now I can take action with all of these programs or incentives or rebates to really drive that energy usage down to save me money. And I think that's another story we ended up overshooting.
Yeah.
So anyway, all to
No,
say is why I loved your
mhm.
project and wanted you to share, because I think the missing link is like the labor, the time, the resources, and like really the expertise. So you said you had to utilize IT a lot. Then you also had to have the understanding of really all the other systems at play. So
Yeah, absolutely.
kudos to you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and you brought up some interesting topics, and it could sidetrack us. I have to be careful there. But yeah, you talk about load factor on the grid, making sure that right we're not building out massive infrastructure just for those very high peaks. We want to make sure we're using that infrastructure on throughout the year, balancing. There's a lot that my department does in that world of,
Yeah, tell
if
me
you heard
about it.
of non-wires
What is your
alternative.
department, by the
Okay.
way?
Oh, okay. Maybe I skipped that step. My department at Orange and Rockland is called Customer Energy Services. So we do handle all the energy efficiency programs you hear about in New York and New Jersey, right? Both parts of our service territory. So all the programs from the appliance rebate programs to the complex commercial and industrial type programs for HVAC systems, complicated control systems. But we also do if you've heard of non-wires and non-pipeline alternative programs, which are very targeted, and that's very infrastructure, right? Energy efficiency in itself, it's cross-cutting, horizontal, any customers can access it. But when you talk about something called like a non-wires alternative program, where you're really trying to address a constraint, a load constraint in a particular network or circuit within our service territory, the idea there is exactly what you just described earlier, which is how to make sure we're not spending tens of millions of dollars on infrastructure that's only going to be necessary for that hottest day of the year. Right? You're getting demand growth. You're getting more people purchasing EVs, interconnecting distributed energy resources, which is great. How to utilize all that in that targeted area that has that constraint so you don't end up building a substation there. That's a massive effect in the community. You
So
do it through efficiency. You do it through the building energy usage portal, right? You interconnect all that.
And so I guess I was a little biased with this project because I have my own personal story. When I was overseeing transmission and distribution planning, I was looking at a circuit to circuit feeder, forecast based on this peak granular. And, through the grapevine of just being in an organization, a corporation, I learned about this energy efficiency program. So I'm like a leader within the operations realm. And I'm like, well, I know of it. And, there was a program that the state stood up. So I like went hunting for the you of my
Hmm.
former company. I was like, hey, what if I gave you neighborhoods that I would actively want some energy efficiency programs to be directed right at? And, that I remember that gentleman, we became friends that day. He was like, I've been seeking this knowledge for 10 years, Elizabeth. Let us, figure this out. And so that was the beginning of like the non-wire alternative like approach to planning, which I think is like a missing link in the story that we're all trying to tell, right? Is like it seems minute and maybe small, but like it's compounding, right? In
Yeah.
regards to if you can offset some conductor upgrades based on managing load, which seems really novel and new 10 years ago, but now it's like, this is what we
Mainstream.
do.
Yeah.
This is like, we're at a tipping point. Energy usage is the foundation of energy efficiency, but it starts with understanding why from like a grid planning forecast, anything. So yeah,
Yeah. So Elizabeth, exactly. It sounds like, listen, you were probably maybe at the forefront of this a decade ago, thinking about how to create this or innovate on this idea, but now it's mainstream. I can tell you,
right.
in all electric new construction planning, new business, and in all gas new construction infrastructure planning, it's always what does the NWA suitability criteria tell you? What does the NPA suitability criteria? If it's suitable for an NPA or an NWA, we're doing it. That's how the company works
Yes.
at Con Ed.
And I love that. See,
Yeah,
progress is being
yeah,
made, stakeholders. But, like you asking for your 6 month, just give me 6 months. It's like, hey, we just implemented this really powerful system, AMI. It has accessibility to some data. And so to build this portal, we're going to need to understand that new system, how it incorporates with our old systems, and then integrate it with this exterior system, which is the DOE energy management software that you spoke of.
yeah.
And so there's
Energy Star.
some thought leadership that is needed, and then we need the time and the resources, aka the money and the humans, to
Yes.
execute. So I guess my next question really is, one, and to reiterate the power, when customers, and that's another thing is like with new build, right? Like there was a lot of like learnings of like, well, what is your load request? And they're like, and they tend to like overestimate, right? Because you don't want to like build your infrastructure and then you don't
You don't
have
have
the
enough.
grids, right? So like there's just been a human behavior to overestimate your load usage. And now in the world of data centers, like this is being exploited. But as the grid owners, we need to know like what your plans are, right? In your overall goals of like, taking energy off the grid. So when customers and building owners and operators of said systems, aka that your commercial industrial customers, see their energy usage in this granular way, I mean they themselves can identify any waste or inefficiency. They can then make informed operational decisions and behavioral changes. I mean, it's empowering our end users in a way to the benefit of both. So anyway, so my point is, so now you're a part of this group that is effectively running your customer programs, and I love the NWA piece. So you're probably directly aligned with your planning group or connected. Line would be presumptuous, but anyway,
No, absolutely.
what
Yeah.
what do you think the next, like, some of your next goals or some of your next visions of, or what was like some aha moments once that this was in place and users were using it that you really weren't predicting?
Right, right, and I'd say we're definitely now very aligned with the new business, new construction. So what we do encourage customers, sometimes, you're working with an architect or a developer on a project, and yes, you probably will be oversizing some systems. That's the traditional way of sizing, electrical needs and natural gas needs for a facility. But certainly, we get involved. We would love to consult. We have engineers on our team that could provide a review and say, "Listen, if you use energy efficient equipment such as X, Y, and Z, you could bring down your load." What's going to end up happening ultimately is if you don't do that upfront work at the modeling stage and design stage, and you go to that basis of design and construction, you're going to end up having power factor issues where you have a way oversized system. You have appliances that are not efficient. So there's a lot. You can end up paying for a lot more down the line by not just the fact that you don't have an Energy Star or energy efficient equipment in the building, so you're paying extras for that. You're also paying for unnecessary load that you never needed. So there's a lot of benefits to actually very much coordinating your new construction project with an engineering and architect firm that's very familiar with energy efficiency. Now, that's just a core principle of design, and I think that's pretty much well known throughout the construction industry at this point. Now, in terms of what we could provide, once again, getting back to the BUP tool, the Building Issues Portage tool, we're very heavily flagging. That means or marketing things on that site so that customers realize this is very much a pathway for you to get into existing building efficiency. I know very often, if you're a new construction facility, you're not going to have much to benchmark. You don't have that
Right.
kind of historical data, but it's really for the existing customers who have been managing their property for quite a while and want to explore new programs. So we've done that. What I do notice is a lot of the users of our portals, we give two options. When you enroll in our portal, you could be the representative of the building. That means you're the owner, you're the property manager, or you could be an authorized representative, like a consultant, maybe an ESCO type company. I'm noticing it's about 50-50. Half the users of our site are hired consultants. So the ownership entity or the property management entity is saying, you know what, I'm turning my responsibility over to a consulting firm who's going to benchmark and take me to that next step. So it's very fascinating how those companies are growing by leaps and bounds.
Mhm.
These third party ESCO or energy planning type companies.
So actually, there's a linkage there. There's this in this time. The fear of advanced analytics, advanced technology, advanced tools. Dare I say that other two-letter combo, AI, has the potential to remove jobs. I think, being able to provide information that has never been useful before can actually said create jobs, right? So like you just said, like a lot of these consultant firms are perking up because now they have the data to be able to run some really effective deliverables and or use cases to the end user. So I just wanted to link that
Yeah,
up.
absolutely. Yeah, there's always going to be. It's hard to think 10 years down the line, but yeah, certainly AI is getting rid of some of the data analytics that used to have to be done, right? Even in the energy consulting business, there's a lot of manual work that used to have to happen from looking through billing data, looking for those peaks and valleys. That stuff is starting to get automated. So just like, for example, like radiology is starting to get automated, picking problems when someone looks at an X-ray. But there's still, I still see a very strong market or business sector for people that take those results into action,
Right.
right? Because you're always going to need that mindset of someone that says, okay, now I could see this building is benchmarked very poorly, has a much higher EUI, energy usage intensity, than anything else in that sector in this geographical territory. Now, how do I advise my customer on how to take action? What equipment to fix or to upgrade, where to find the contractor and engineering firm to spec that out, how to get the rebate money or the available incentive money through tax credits or through the utility. All that steps is still going to be requiring people with subject matter expertise, lots of experience in the industry. So I see that industry, continuing, for certainly quite a while into the near future.
So I love it. And I guess, one, thank you for showing up and sharing your story, and also just an opportunity for me to share, that this type of work, it's beyond a portal or a toll. It's really laying the groundwork for energy efficiency to scale, to really drive insight that drives trust and gives us human or connective communal needs the ability to, translate, what can be done to kind of solve some of these big problems that we're up against. So with our last minute or two, any advice for, someone in your shoes inside a utility that maybe just is deploying AMI, or maybe is in the process of like unlocking some data that they have not had access to, any words of wisdom of, how to get started or what to be aware of as they trudge forward?
I would say there's a lot happening. New York just finished what was called the New Efficiency New York Energy Efficiency Programming Cycle. So there's a new cycle starting up next year, 2026 to 2030. I would say definitely if you're someone who's in the industry or you're looking to get started in this business from a consulting standpoint, read those proceedings because you'll find out exactly where the state is going in terms of its energy vision. Heavily focused on strategic electrification, heavily focused on envelope weatherization for all types of sectors. So that's from that perspective. If you're a property owner, from the large commercial owner, it's find out who are those experts. Review what's been going on, and yeah, you don't want to be behind the curve. The last thing you want to stay competitive. If you're in the real estate industry and you have a property, those properties need to stay occupied to stay competitive. You're going to stay competitive if you're maximizing your energy use, your knowledge, your information, and interpreting that information to properly execute how your buildings operate. So pay attention to that. New Jersey, same situations going on. New Jersey, that's another state where we work heavily in. Same issue. New Jersey is finishing up its second, we call it the Triennium 2 Clean Energy Act cycle. That's about halfway over at this point. Triennium 3 cycle is going to be starting in 2027. So there's a lot of statewide investment, utility-wide pushes in this sector to be sharp from a business perspective, or from, once again, if it's just your property, you want to be informed. Last thing you want to be is the person who is dealing with a structure that's 50, 60, 70 years old, wasting energy. And people, if your residents are unhappy, they're uncomfortable in your building, they're paying, that means you're not doing your job. You're not staying on top of the technology that's available and the way to keep the energy bills down. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Oh, I love it. Okay. Full of antidotes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for sharing the story, and I look forward to hearing about all of the new work that'll come out of this portal and all the effort that went forward. So thanks, Phil. And to
Thank
our
you,
listeners,
Elizabeth.
thank you for tuning in, and until next time.
Have a nice day, everyone.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.